Well, Shabbat Shalom and welcome. This is Torah Study for a Shabbos morning. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein of Valley Beth Shalom in Encino, California, joined this morning, as always, by my teacher and dear friend, Rabbi Mark Gelman of South Florida. Mark, good morning, good
Yay.
Shabbos.
Good Shabbos, my friend.
So we have approached, this week as we have the last, I guess, 4 or 5 now, with terrible heavy hearts, listening to the reports of the fighting going on in Israel, the terrifying losses of Israeli soldiers who are trying to root out the violence of Hamas, and as well the injuries incurred by and deaths incurred by civilians in the Palestinian population.
And
And
the hostages
and
of
of
all.
course, thinking of those hostages and listening to the stories of their parents and their spouses and loved ones and friends.
Yep.
And so, we have been so clouded by this. It's been so very difficult. I don't want to apologize, but I think, that's the reason why we've spent these last few weeks talking about issues of anti-Semitism and violence rather than focusing on the Torah reading, because we are so held by this, so hypnotized by it, by so captive ourselves, our attention so captive by these events. And that hasn't changed. This morning we pray for the families of those that are lost. We pray for the families of the hostages. We pray for those whose family members are fighting. We pray that they're protected and cared for. However, as I've said in the synagogue so many times, what the bad guys want most of all is to disrupt Jewish life, to take away from us our love of Torah, the warmth of Shabbos, the support and kindness of community. And so our living well as Jews is actually the best revenge. It's the best resistance to push back against the hate here in America that we've encountered and the violence and horror that we've encountered in Israel. So what we're going to do this morning, with everyone's permission, is return to the Torah portion as our way
Yay.
of reaffirming what's truly important to us. And this morning it is a Torah portion, it's Chayei Sarah, which is a transitional Torah portion. And it's acknowledged as a transition between the stories of Abraham, who was the heroic founder of this whole narrative, and what comes next, the next narratives of the family of Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and the rest. And this Torah portion is a transition, and it includes two principal events, both of whom are frankly prosaic. There's nothing phenomenal. There's nothing unusual. 2 weeks ago, we read about Abraham being called by God, Lech lecha, leave your home and follow me. And last week, of course, Abraham is arguing with God over Sodom and Gomorrah, and then called to the top of Mount Moriah to sacrifice his son. These are heroic, profound revelations of both God and Abraham's heart. And we will get more coming in the weeks to come, but this Torah portion has none of that. In fact, what's in this Torah portion is so common. And the question is, why is it here? What is divine? What is of ultimate importance in these two events? Two events. The Torah portion begins with the death of Sarah, and Abraham, who has schlepped her through all of his journeys and frankly didn't have much to say to her, all of a sudden recognizes who Sarah is to him and how important she is to him. And he cries. That's the beginning of the Torah portion. And then he must set out to find a burial place for his wife. And the first half of the Kriya, the first half of the Torah portion, is the purchase of a cave right outside of the town of Hebron, the cave of Machpelah, where the patriarchs and the matriarchs are buried. He purchases this. He purchases from this cave from Ephron the Hittite and buries his wife. That's episode number 1. And episode number 2 is, having buried his wife, he now remembers that his son is getting up in years and needs a wife. And in that community, it was very common for the family. It was expected that the family would arrange the marriage of the heir, of the son. And so Abraham must arrange a marriage for his son and sends his servant, who's later identified as Eliezer, but here it's just the servant, back to the old country, back to Mesopotamia, to negotiate with a family back there to bring one of the girls, one of the cousins, to be the wife of Isaac. And it turns out to be Rebecca, and she comes back, and as the Torah portion comes to an end, they meet, they are instantly in love. In fact, the wonderful line is that as when Rebecca sees Isaac standing in the field, she falls off the camel. And it's the first example of a young woman who fell in love with a great Jewish hero. And they enter, and the wonderful thing is, if for those who enjoy psychology, they move into Sarah's tent, and Isaac is comforted from the loss of his mother by the presence of his wife. In the Midrash, which is so very beautiful, the story is that Rebecca begins to bake challah and lights the Shabbos candles of her mother-in-law, of Isaac's mother. And once again, the light and warmth of Sabbath and domestic life returns to Isaac's heart, and he is comforted from the loss of his mom. So, Mark, the first question is, what is profound in these two moments, which are so common? They're moments that, frankly, just about every family has experienced: the loss of a loved one and the burial of a loved one, and then the matching up of the kid and the beginning of the next generation of matrimony and family life. Why is the whole Torah portion devoted to these two events? And what do we learn? What do we learn from, particularly the second one, which is the uplifting one of love and romance and marriage? What do we learn here?
All right. Well, I think this portion, which seems transitional, and it is, which seems like a sort of agav peripheral story, is actually a centerpiece of the most important moral and spiritual creation of Western civilization, not just Jewish, but Jewish as well, and that is marriage and family. And at the core of it is a question that is as old as time. And that question is one that every one of us has faced personally, someone who are married, and that we face in terms of our children. And the question, to put it simply, is how do you become a good picker? How do you learn this fundamental skill in creating a fundamental institution like the family? It seems like there are two basic options. One is the most recent, but it's actually only from the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, and that is romantic love. You pick who you're romantically attracted to. And the other is arranged marriage, which is what we have here in the Torah and what we still have today in the shadchan and the arranger of marriages in Judaism, and of course in Hinduism you have it as still the dominant form, in which other people pick for you. People who are older in your family, they do the picking. So I want to ask people to reflect on this, whether you're a good picker and whether you've trained your children to be good pickers. So one day, Tommy and I are interviewing somebody on the God Squad, and he's written a book about marriage. And he said the most successful marriages turn out to be marriages between people who are as close as possible to each other in everything: what they believe, what they love, people who are extremely close and similar have better marriages than that line in McGuire, the movie, with "You complete me." This idea, I'm here, you're there, we're totally different, but you complete. it turns out you completely isn't a good philosophy of picking, but picking someone who's like you is. But this is what I want our viewers to think about, and what I think about often, because in the case of my family, both our kids' marriages ended in divorces, and it's very difficult. And Betty and I are almost ready to celebrate our 54th wedding anniversary.
Mazel tov.
Yeah. So I was a good picker. She was a good picker, but our kids are not good pickers. And I wonder, why is it that people who are smart, both my kids are smart, sensitive, they're both sensitive, they're both kind, they're good, but they're just not good pickers. And you and I have interviewed thousands of couples who are about to be married. And although I don't keep score about, do I think this marriage is going to last or not, you have opinions among people you counsel. And it's pretty obvious that some people sitting in front of us who are going to get married by us are bad pickers. I mean, maybe the marriage will work out. I'm not a prophet or the son of a prophet, but so I want you to think about what it is that makes someone a good picker. And I would suggest the answer to that question for me and my observations, personally, my view is that good pickers know what's good for them. They know what they need, not what they want. What they want may be, a Playboy centerfold or some guy who, is looks like he's exercising in Venice Beach. I don't know. Physical beauty, let's say. That may be what they want, but it's not what they need. And this remains an interesting literary and personal theme, in addition to being a spiritual challenge. Betty and I have just gotten hooked on the HBO series, The Gilded Age, which is basically fancy costumes about American super wealthy people in the 1880s. And, Fifth Avenue crowd. And the theme of the series is, how do you become a good picker, and how do rich people protect their children from marrying gold diggers, and how do you work it all? So that's the big theme here, is how to become a good picker, because it's a theme that is as relevant today as it was 3,000 years ago when the Torah referred to this.
So I want to step back a second, and before we answer the question, or I give a go at the answering the question, I want to take a sort of running start at this. Okay. So first of all, the first thing I want to point out is what you said at the very beginning. This Torah portion is about family, and it's about two of the functions of family. One function is the burial of a loved one and the sense of connection. And it's actually interesting because in terms of marriage and family, it's a relationship between Abraham and Sarah. The Torah portion asks us to go back and look at that relationship. And the second, of course, is the marriage of the child. But the idea that at the core of civilization, at our civilization, is this idea of family. And that was once completely obvious to everybody. But I would suggest to you that it's not obvious anymore, that there is a thread, a trope, as they call it, a theme in our culture that derides family, that sees family as a power relationship. It sees it as denying the self its full growth and expression. It sees family as a prison. And the idea that family really matters, that family really is important, and that a society, a community and a society has an interest in protecting family, is something very, very important. And then beyond family, of course, at the core of that is marriage, is this remarkable institution. See, at the beginning of the Torah, after God creates the world, the very first story, God sees this human being in the garden and says, "Lo tov heyot adam levado." It isn't right that this man be left alone. I'm going to make him an ezer kenegdo. Big controversy about what that word means. Ezer means to be a help, a companion. Kenegdo means his opposite. And so the Torah takes this question of how it is we bond with each other, even though we are not genetic alikes. You don't fall in love with your siblings. You don't even you fall in love with a person who comes from a different genetic pool, as it were, of different family. And frankly, because families have their own cultures, you fall in love with someone who's been raised very differently than you, or speaks differently, acts differently. And because, at least in certain circumstances these days, we fall in love with somebody of another gender, of another sexual preference, as it were. We fall in love with people who are wired differently than us. And the mystery of why that works. Again, one of the questions that you and I have dealt with is so many times with couples and with families and with marriage and with divorce. And the question is always like, why didn't it work? Well, I got a better question. Why does it work? I mean, what a miracle that you take two human beings who are completely different. And even if your guest on your program was right and they look like they're the same, they're never the same. They're completely different, and you smash them together like a nuclear fusion, and somehow it works. And one of the mysteries of why of it working is the fact that when I got married when I was 25, Nina was 23. We were both really young
Hey,
and really
21.
and really cute, by the way, too.
Yeah,
You know, we were
you're
both
still
cute.
cute. You're
Yeah.
still cute.
But so there's this wonderful song that I quoted in a sermon this year. It was Paul McCartney's tribute to his parents. Will you still need me? Will you still
Yeah,
feed
it was
me
a
when
great
I'm
sermon.
64? Now, but see, here's the thing. You're a different person than you were when you were 21.
Yes, I am.
And so the question isn't, do you love me now? Of course you love me now. You're adorable. You're still going to love me when I don't look this way. You're still going to love me when my interests and my commitments and my values have grown and changed. It's not just picking now. It's picking the person you're prepared to grow with. It's picking because marriage is dynamic. I like to say to couples, you don't marry once. You marry many times. You go through many phases in your life and you fall in love all over again. And how does that work? How is it that you fall in love with your spouse, the one you've been with all over again, and rediscover each other and discover new things that you share? So it's such a mystery to me. The whole business of marriage is a mystery to me. And I'm so interested not in why couples fall apart. It's easy to see why couples fall apart. They stop communicating, they stop sharing, they stop finding something interesting, and they get on each other's nerves. What's so interesting is how we stay together. Why did you and Betty stay together why did she put up with you for so long? That to me is the great mystery here, right?
Talk to me about picking.
Well,
how do you become a good picker?
Well, I think that part of it is this. I think it's ezer kenegdo. Part of it is a person who shares your basic core values,
Okay,
the
that's
things that
one.
really matter to you. Because
Okay,
if you
I think
marry
that's
someone who is outside of your core values, it means that living with that person demands that you cancel that part of yourself. And canceling a part of yourself is never a formula for a happy relationship. But then that person has to be different enough from you to be interesting. That person has to be different from you in enough ways in order there the complete me part I think fits very nicely, because there it's a question of the person is different enough to introduce me to things I never understood, I never saw, or can teach me to do things I never thought I could do, or could make up for some of the gaps in my own program. My wife has a sense of aesthetics that I simply don't have. right? She was raised in a world of beautiful things and beautiful uh, expressions, an artistic world. Her mother's an artist, and her parents have a taste for these things. My family were very pragmatic. They were kibbutzniks. I can get stuff done, right? But I can't make beautiful things the way she can. And so I've appreciated that. When I married, I appreciated. I said, "Boy, this is wonderful. There's somebody in the house who actually knows how to pick out things that match." You know, it's wonderful. So I think it's both. It's both the person who fits you and shares your core values, but also makes up for the gaps in your own personality. And I can't give you the formula. I simply don't know. I used to think when I was a young rabbi, couples would come see me to get married, and I could pick out who was going to last and who wasn't. I soon gave that up. I'm much more humble now because I
Yes,
can't tell. There are couples I thought didn't have a chance. They're
right.
very happy years and years later. There are couples I thought were just great for each other. Didn't work, right? And then, of course, there's one more piece of this, which I'll finish with. There's a piece that goes to another. It refers to another story in the Bible. In a parsha or two, we're going to get to this story of Jacob, our father Jacob, and he goes to his family in Mesopotamia, same family that Eliezer is visiting this week, and he falls in love with his cousin Rachel, who apparently was very beautiful and and he just falls head over heels and works for her for 7 years. And when he marries her, he wakes up with her sister Leah, and he's very upset. And he ends up married to both of them, Nebuch, right? But I think in a very real way, what the Torah is trying to talk to us is that, in a sense, all of us do that. We go to bed with Rachel and wake up with Leah. You are attracted to this person who just captures your heart and your soul, leaves you breathless. You fall in love. That's the phrase. But as you build a relationship over time, as you build a home and a family and you deal with the struggles of being together, you evolve into a different kind of relationship. And what's beautiful in the Torah, as we get to that story in a couple of weeks, is to watch the way that Jacob, who was so in love with Rachel, in the end, bonds very deeply with Leah because she has a strength inside, because she has a vision, because it has well, the Torah's metaphor for this is that she's fruitful. She's able to give him things that he didn't even know he needed. There's a sort of quality of self-discovery that he discovers in his relationship with Leah that he never had with Rachel. So in a certain way, we all go to bed with Rachel and wake up with Leah. We all marry the woman of our dreams and then discover that she's the woman of our life. And that's what's so wonderful.
That's beautifully said. I've also gone through that period of, I know this isn't going to work. I know this is going to work, to I know nothing. I know nothing. I can predict nothing. I am stupid about which marriages work and which ones don't. However, I cling, because I am a systematic thinker, I cling to the hopeful but undoubtedly naive notion that I can figure out who's a good picker and why. So here's what I got. I got two things. I got a couple sitting in front of me, and I'm listening to them, watching them. First thing I am clearly aware of is I'm not listening much to what they say. I'm looking at how they are together. And I'm looking for two things. Do they touch each other physically? Does he find a way to just, touch her, just to touch her, and she to touch him? Because that shows a level of physical intimacy that I think is important in picking. It's what you call falling in love. It's the physical attraction. And without that physical attraction, you can't be a good picker. The second is, do they laugh?
Mm.
Do they laugh? In other words, I don't care if it's a stupid joke. I don't care what it is. Does he say something that she laughs at? And does she say something that he chuckles at? So that means that they're listening to each other. They find each other to be endlessly witty and appealing. And those are the two big things. Do they love? Do they touch? Then there's some peripheral things in being a good picker. And that is, do they come from an intact home? This has obviously been proven through hundreds of studies that the chances of creating an intact home, which is already a moral challenge, are much less if you know what that looks like because you grew up in an intact home. Now, it's not a guarantee. As I said, both our kids grew up in an intact home where Betty and I love each other madly, and they both got divorced. But I think marrying someone who has an intact home is important. And then I ask them, what are you proud of the person you're going to marry? You should be proud of the person, about something that the person you're going to marry does. Not just they do stuff and you like what they do, and they like, you both like skiing, you both like whatever, golf. But no, it's, do they do things that are morally appealing, that have nothing to do with you? In other words, are they kind to animals? Are they kind to other people? Do they volunteer their time? I asked a woman once, and she gave me the best answer I've ever heard in 50 years of doing premarital counseling with couples. And I asked her, what do you love about David? And she said, well, one day we're driving on the east side and we're going over the Triborough Bridge, which is in Upper Manhattan on the Upper East Side. And we're going to Long Island to visit his mother. And it was a time when you went through the toll booths, but there was no automatic. You had to throw coins in. And that meant there was always a traffic jam there to get through the coin toss. And newspaper sellers would stand there and sell papers to the drivers in the cars waiting to toss their coins in the toll machine. And it was that day, she said, a brutally hot summer day in New York. And there's a guy selling papers. And she said, as we drove up, David said to the guy, listen, it's way too hot for you to be outside today. Give me all your papers. And he handed him a $100 bill. And he said, go home. Go home. And she said, at that moment, I knew I would marry him. And I was just gobsmacked. I was totally stunned because I had been looking for a perfect picker my whole life. And there it was, right in front of me. A woman who was a perfect picker.
Well, let me ask you a different question then we'll finish with this, I think. What did you learn about yourself from the years you've been married? What did marriage teach you about Mark?
That the only way that I could improve the qualities that I had as a natural gift from God and as qualities I've tried to nurture in myself: compassion, love, wisdom, kindness. The only way I could really make any progress on that was to get out of myself,
Mm-hmm.
to get out of my ego. And the only way I could get out of my ego was to practice loving other people more than I loved myself.
Mm.
And the only way that I could love someone more than myself was to begin with Betty.
Hmm.
And then I could love Max and Mara more than myself, and Zeke and Daisy, our grandchildren, more than myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then I understood what it was like. So when you and I met,
Hmm.
it was the result of me retiring from the synagogue.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Tom had just died, but retiring from the synagogue, leaving 2 golf club memberships, selling our house, leaving all my friends and all of the fame that Tom and I had generated on the East Coast, and moving to Los Angeles to live near our daughter who was going through a difficult divorce. And as I look back on it, it was the greatest sacrifice I've made in my life for my children, and it was very difficult. And you made it easier because you were my friend. You became my friend, and you enabled me to live in Los Angeles without complete despair. I lived for 6 years in Los Angeles with only moderate despair, which made me exactly like other people who live in Los Angeles all the time.
That's probably true.
People with moderate despair. And so as I look back on it, that sacrifice that we made for our daughter was something that was absolutely natural for me. I didn't think for a second about, look at everything you're giving up. I didn't think for a second about, you have no friends out there, and at your age, people aren't looking for new friends. I didn't think of anything about the difficulties. I just said, our daughter needs us. Our grandchildren are young and they need us. And they have dogs that need to be walked. So I think what I've learned is that you can't learn to be the best person you can be unless you learn to love others more than yourself. And marriage is it's not the only way to do that, but it's by far the best way to learn that essential spiritual and life skill.
That's a beautiful statement. That was very beautiful. Thank you.
Oh,
No, that was really touching. And
well,
in the Torah reading this morning, so 2 interesting things happened. So Abraham has been schlepping Sarah, right? God says to Abraham, Lech lecha me'artzecha, leave home and follow me. And it says he takes Sarah, his wife, and they go. And it doesn't record the conversation between the 2 of them. She just comes with him. And then when they get to Eretz Israel, they get to Canaan, and there's a famine. They go down into Egypt, and he says, tell him you're my sister, and she gets kidnapped by the Pharaoh. And then it happens again later with Abimelech. I mean, again and again, she goes along with his antics, with his journey, with his vision. And we don't get much of a conversation with her. The only conversations we get with her have to do with the kid Ishmael. And now she dies, and it says Abraham cried for her. And I think that what happened at that moment is he suddenly realized what part of him was her, where she lived in his heart, and how much he leaned on her strength and her love. And certainly the Midrash plays this up, but the Bible just hints at it. He cries for her, and he realizes how important she was. And then 2 things the Torah tells us. Number 1 is he goes and looks for a wife for his son. He wants his son to have a companion who is as loving and supportive as he had with her. And I think that's a beautiful gift. And the second thing is, as he remarries and has 11 more kids, Kanai Nahara, a guy 100 years old, thank you, right? But the idea that he's not done loving, he loses her, but he's not done. There's still a part of him which desperately needs to be attached and connected. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I think that's what I discovered in life is the necessity of having a companion, a partner, a soulmate. I think that's so very powerful. And in that sense, I would argue that that's what makes this Torah portion so profound, because it deals with two very prosaic common things we all deal with: the death of loved ones, the marriage of a kid. And yet each of those are moments when we find God. Most of us don't find God at the top of Mount Sinai. Most of us don't encounter burning bushes, but all of us encounter these moments when we lose loved ones, and these moments when the people we love marry other people we love and bring them into our lives, and this becomes part of us. And I would say also, because I've also had this experience as you did, that the people that my kids brought into our lives are also people that I cherish. So thank you for listening. A good Shabbos, Mark, to everyone listening, a good Shabbos. Our prayers for our brothers and sisters in Israel who are coping with so very much. Our prayers for the hostages. They should be returned home safely and well. And for the soldiers fighting, and for all of those in Israel whose hearts are so heavy. We're with you and we love you. And for everyone today, let's make this a Shabbat of peace for everyone. Take good care. We'll see you soon.